Chapter 400. Ah, Either suddenly realized that the disappearing figure of Kishir was not reality. The conversation they just shared was a thing of the long forgotten past, an old dream. With that realization, both the familiar sight of the dressing room and the figure of Kishir vanished, leaving Yudir alone in darkness. Staring into the unending darkness, Yudir looked at his hand to find out that only a piece of paper Kishir had handed him still remained. The coldness and anger, the unidentified emotions that Yudir of the past had felt, welled up inside his chest like a mirage, only to fade away weakly. Yes, back then I took this out and showed it to Kishir. Unlike some forgotten memories, this was one of the conversations that remained relatively vivid in his mind. However, although the conversation itself remained impactful, the emotions and thoughts he had felt that day had dimmed and blurred with time, making most parts feel strangely unfamiliar. The never formally accused treason suspicion against Duke Paleta. But at the time, couriers had been busily going back and forth to the Sun Palace beneath the surface. The Emperor of Kachyan had not revealed any particular reaction, but he indirectly showed his caution and warning by keeping an eye on Paleta. Yudir threw the paper, unable to understand the man who entered the commander's room over the wall with a calm face, whether he knew about it or not. Had Duke Paleta Kishirla Or truly shut himself away in his estate with the intention of rebelling? Were the ominous rumors secretly circulating the palace all true? Could he truly harbor the intent to rebel? What Either probably wanted to confirm the most was the third question. In fact, when Either first heard the rumors about Kishir's suspected rebellion, his immediate thought was, what reason could there be from such a person? Rebellion seemed ludicrous. The man was too frivolous and everything about him seemed meaningless. He had abandoned his handcrafted cavalry without regret, showed no sadness at the death of his last blood relative. He escaped from Peleta because he had no gaming partners and jumped over the cavalry's wall. Yudir could not fathom what he was living for. Could someone who seemed to find no meaning in anything really harbor the intent to rebel? What would be the point? The new emperor had become the adoptive son of the previous emperor through legal means, ascending to the throne after holding the position of crown prince. No one doubted that the previous emperor had died of a natural disease. Although the situation was somewhat chaotic at the beginning of the new reign, many citizens welcomed the arrival of a young, energetic, and healthy emperor. Even to the inexperienced eyes of the new cavalry commander, it was clear that the emperor's position would soon become unassailable. Yet another thought crossed his mind. If someone could easily evade surveillance and rush to the capital in an instant, wouldn't it be entirely possible for him to hatch a plot out of the emperor's sight? Was there truly nothing behind his strange and secretive facade? Could the belief that he couldn't possibly harbor the intent to rebel be a horribly wrong judgment, as Kishir had put it, made because they had shared a bed for so long? Despite having been intimate with the man for so long, Yudir had nothing he could be certain of. Therefore, he had to ask in order to find the answer. And the answer that returned shattered every nameless fragment of emotion inside Yudir, summoning a bitterly cold winter. After that time, Kishir never sought out his room again. Yudir also bolted the window through which the man used to pass and never reopened it. Having thought up to that point, Yudir let go of the paper he was holding. The piece of paper, lost in darkness, vanished without a trace. Perhaps then I wanted to believe Kishir. As the time went on, looking back once again at that era, he saw something he hadn't felt back then. At that time, Yudhir might have wanted to believe in Kishir more than he thought he did. Could he really have not known the exception and fear that shone brightly in the unwavered face? The word priority that Kishir left behind at the time had a sufficient effect in stimulating the sense of responsibility that was still unfamiliarly resting on Yudhir's shoulders, especially since it was a turbulent time with protests related to the existence of the first cavalry commander of commoner origin and the treatment of the Awakeners. Whether they liked it or not, the status of the cavalry was undoubtedly closely related to the treatment of the Awakeners throughout the empire, and Yudhir was the only one who could protect all of them. It was too difficult and heavy of a task for someone who had lived alone without ever taking responsibility for anything. But after that time, he forgot the weight. The anger and disappointment left by Kishirla Or made all of that possible. He refused to admit it then, so he never even thought about it. But now he seemed to understand. Yudhir wanted to keep the cavalry intact, so easily left behind by Kishirla Or. From the moment he realized that he could no longer rely on anyone to stand on his own and move forward on his own, furiously. But thinking about it now, that too is probably. Kishir had returned the paper pulled out by Yudhir twice. If he had wanted to use that fact, he could have easily taken advantage of Yudhir at that time, but instead he left something close to advice. As a result, Yudhir began to move with priority in mind thereafter, as he mentioned, which was no different from following his words again. Behind the old misunderstanding, things that were hidden behind the unknown. Yudhir recalled the shadowed red eyes that had looked at him. The deeply recessed, cold and gloomy eyelids, the lustreless, brittle ends of his hair, and the cheeks as pale as if the blood had stopped flowing. He had not found it strange because it was that man, but now that he knew the healthy version of him, nothing seemed normal. First of all, the situation in which Kishir was in was like that. He didn't know it then, but now he knew the fact that the previous life's Kishir might have suffered significant damage to his vessel not long after he had created the cavalry. Even in such a state, when neither suffered injuries that almost cut off both his arms, he knew that the wound healed for some reasons that could not be explained unless Kishir secretly used divine power. He now knew that he had expected enough to tacitly approve of Kishir's excuse of jumping the fence, using the tactical game he played with him as an excuse. Did the real reason for Kishirla Or to rebel exist? Were the things that he believed in then the truth? Why hadn't he denied or affirmed the question? He wanted to know, like the sudden realization of an unknown hunger. Yudhir became acutely aware that he desperately wanted to know the answer. I want to know. Something that could not be understood by mere speculation. The answer to something that had been lost, leaving countless empty holes within. The secrets that Kishir might have hidden from him, or perhaps he had told him but were forgotten and might have vanished without him even knowing. As he fiercely focused on his thought alone, a light suddenly burst forth from the darkness. A familiar yet intense red energy obscured his vision, followed by a shimmering haze mixed with golden energy, enveloping it like a mist. A dreamlike and beautiful dance of light dazzled his eyes, and as they cleared once again, Yudhir found himself standing once more in a dream of the past he had seen one day. It's been a long time since this happened. I thought it was an illusion, but it's real. It's astonishing. A low voice that sounded incredibly elegant, though devoid of strength. Beyond the blurred view, he could see the face of a man sitting upright at a desk. gloved hands elegantly folded, and the interior of Peleta Castle he had seen just once. It was the cashier from that day.